On the night of October 17th, 1875, fisherman Thomas Grayson stood at the edge of Black Harbour's rocky shore, watching something that should not exist. Blue lights, dozens of them, danced across the Atlantic waters like frozen flames, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. His wife would later tell authorities that Thomas whispered something about beautiful voices before walking into the freezing ocean, fully dressed, never to return. His body washed ashore 3 days later, skin pale, as moonlight, eyes wide open and strange symbols carved into his chest, symbols that matched no known language but seemed disturbingly familiar to the oldest residents of this isolated Maine fishing village. Thomas was not the first, and he would certainly not be last. Welcome to this journey into one of coastal New England's most disturbing mysteries, a case that blends historical witch panic, unexplained phenomena, and deaths that authorities could never satisfactorily explain. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Are you alone? Drop a comment below. There's something about sharing these stories together that makes them feel less isolating. And trust me, you'll want that comfort as we proceed. The year is 1875. The place is Black Harbor, Maine, a fishing community of roughly 300 souls, perched on a particularly desolate stretch of the Atlantic coast, 20 miles north of Portland. The American Civil War has been over for a decade, but its scars remain fresh. Many of Black Harbor's men never returned from battlefields in Virginia and Pennsylvania. The town is rebuilding, slowly, sustained by fishing, timber, and the grim determination that characterizes all New England coastal settlements. But something is wrong in Black Harbor. Throughout September and into October of that year, residents begin reporting strange lights appearing over the ocean after sunset. At first, they're dismissed as unusual aurora activity or reflected moonlight on the waves. But the lights persist, they grow brighter, they move with purpose, tracing patterns across the water that seem almost deliberate. Then the disappearances begin. On October 3rd, Samuel Harrow, 19 years old, goes missing after telling his mother he saw blue fire calling from the woods. His body is discovered 6 days later in a tidal pool, positioned in a way that suggests he walked there deliberately and laid down to die. The local doctor, Herbert Wainwright, notes in his report, a report that would later be suppressed, that Samuel's expression was one of profound peace, as if witnessing something transcendent in his final moments. On October 12th, 2 more fishermen vanish. Brothers Jacob and Nathaniel Pierce. Their boat is found abandoned, drifting 3 miles offshore, its nets still full of cod. No signs of struggle, no indication of why 2 experienced seamen would abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel. And then Thomas Grayson makes his fatal walk into the ocean, and the town of Black Harbor can no longer pretend that something natural is happening. Because Thomas Grayson's body bears those symbols, carved deep, and the oldest woman in town, 83-year-old widow Martha Brennan, takes one look at the corpse and says something that chills every person in the room. The keepers have returned. When pressed to explain, Martha refuses to speak further. She locks herself in her home and will not answer her door for anyone. 3 days later, she's found dead in her rocking chair, facing the ocean, a peaceful expression on her weathered face. Natural causes, the doctor declares, but in her hands is clutched a piece of paper torn from some old journal with a single sentence written in faded ink. The pact was never broken, the flames still hunger. What pact? What flames? And why, after more than 150 years, would anyone in Black Harbor remember something about keepers? The answer lies buried in church archives, in suppressed historical documents, and in one woman's desperate investigation into a past that powerful people wanted to remain forgotten. To understand what happened in Black Harbor in 1875, we must travel back nearly 2 centuries, to 1698 to be precise, when this stretch of Maine coast was still under Massachusetts colonial administration, and the hysteria of the Salem witch trials was a fresh, traumatic memory throughout New England. The settlement that would become Black Harbor was originally known as Wycliffe Point, named after Captain Edward Wycliffe, a veteran of King William's War, who established a small fishing outpost in 1692. The community grew slowly. By 1698, approximately 60 people called it home, most of them families who worked the dangerous Atlantic fishing grounds. But Wycliffe Point had a problem that set it apart from other New England settlements: women. Historical records from the Massachusetts Bay Colony archives, documents, discovered in 1923 by historian Dr. Patricia Henshaw, reveal that Wycliffe Point had an unusual demographic. Nearly 2/3 of its adult population was female. This was the result of an intentional settlement pattern. Edward Wycliffe, himself widowed 3 times, had a progressive view for his era. He actively recruited widows, unmarried women, and even a few accused witches who had fled other communities during the Panic of 1692. The official story was that these women would provide domestic labor for the fishing community. The unofficial reality was darker. Wycliffe Point became a refuge, a place where women with nowhere else to go could rebuild their lives, away from the judgmental eyes of Puritan society. Among these women was Constance Blackwood. Constance arrived in Wycliffe Point in 1693, aged 26, from Salem Village. She had been imprisoned during the witch trials, but was released when the hysteria collapsed and Governor Phipps dissolved the special court. She never spoke about what happened to her in that prison, but those who knew her remarked on how she had changed. She was no longer the gentle Quaker girl who had been arrested. Something harder, colder, had taken root. By 1695, Constance had become the de facto leader of Wycliffe Point's women. She organized them into a mutual protection society, taught them herbal medicine and midwifery, and, according to a suspicious letter from the colony governor in 1697, was conducting ungodly ceremonies in the forest clearings north of the settlement. Colonial authorities began investigating these reports in early 1698. What they claimed to discover horrified them. According to testimony recorded in the colonial court records, preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society, witnesses reported seeing unnatural blue flames in the woods at night, strange chanting in no Christian tongue, and marks upon trees that caused men to become ill when viewed. When colonial militia arrived to investigate in March 1698, they found what they described as an altar of blasphemy, a clearing in the woods where a stone structure had been built, surrounded by what witnesses claimed were human bones and offerings of blood. 7 women were arrested, Constance Blackwood among them. The trial was swift and brutal. Unlike the Salem proceedings, which had at least maintained the appearance of proper legal procedure, the Wycliffe Point trials were summary affairs. The women were accused of witchcraft, of making pacts with maritime demons, of sacrificing children and sailors to ensure good fishing seasons for their community. No actual evidence was presented. No missing children were identified. No bodies produced. It didn't matter. On April 3, 1698, all 7 women were burned alive on a pyre built at the edge of the harbor, the very spot where Black Harbor's main dock would later be constructed. Colonial records describe the executions in disturbing detail. How the women did, not scream, but instead sang in unison until the flames consumed them. How the fire burned with an unusual blue tint that witnesses found unsettling. How the ashes scattered across the water and seemed to glow on the waves for hours afterward. The colonial governor ordered all references to the Women's Society destroyed, all their possessions burned, and the settlement's name changed from Wycliffe Point to Black Harbor. a name meant to signify the darkness that had been purged. Captain Edward Wycliffe himself died under mysterious circumstances 3 weeks after the executions, found drowned in shallow water despite being an excellent swimmer. Within a decade, most of the original settlers had departed. New families moved in, people who knew nothing of what had happened. The old stories were deliberately suppressed, passed down only in whispers among the oldest families. By 1875, almost no one in Black Harbour knew the true history of their town. The land had been scraped clean of its past, rebuilt on a foundation of enforced forgetting. Almost no one knew. But someone was about to rediscover the truth, and that discovery would cost lives. Margaret Wycliffe arrived in Black Harbour on September 15, 1875, carrying 2 leather suitcases, a teaching certificate from Boston Normal School, and a name she didn't yet realize was cursed. She was 28 years old, educated, unmarried, and, by the standards of a small Maine fishing village, dangerously modern. She had been hired to teach at Black Harbour's one-room schoolhouse, replacing the previous teacher who had died of consumption. Margaret viewed the position as temporary, a stepping stone to a better appointment in a proper city. She expected to be bored. She had no idea she would become the key investigator in one of New England's most disturbing mysteries. Margaret's diary, discovered in 1954 in the attic of the old Black Harbour schoolhouse, now housed in the Maine Historical Society, provides our most detailed account of what happened during those terrible autumn months. Her entries begin mundanely enough: complaints about the isolation, observations about her students, notes on lesson plans. Then, on September 28, 1875, her tone changes. Something strange occurred this evening. After dismissing the children, I walked along the shore to clear my head. The sun was setting and the ocean was perfectly calm. Then I saw them. Lights, blue and luminous, appearing perhaps a half-mile offshore. At first, thought them to be lanterns from fishing boats, but their movement was wrong. They seemed to pulse like heartbeats, and they drifted slowly toward the shore. I watched for nearly 20 minutes. When I mentioned this to Mrs. Henderson at supper, she became quite pale and asked me never to speak of such things again. When I pressed her, she would only say that the lights are a bad omen and refused to elaborate. Margaret was not the superstitious type. She attributed the lights to some natural phenomenon, bioluminescent algae perhaps, or unusual atmospheric conditions. She continued her teaching duties. Then Samuel Harrow disappeared. Margaret knew Samuel. He was one of her students, a quiet boy who showed promise in reading but struggled with mathematics. When he didn't appear in class on October 4th, she assumed he was ill. By October 6th, when his body was found, Margaret attended the town meeting called to discuss the tragedy. It was here that she first heard the whispers. "Like the old times," one elderly fisherman muttered. "The lights are back," a woman said, crossing herself. "Someone should check the old church records," suggested another voice, quickly silenced by neighbours. Margaret's curiosity was piqued. What old times? What records? That evening, she approached Pastor Isaiah Crane, the stern 62-year-old minister who had served Black Harbour's Congregational Church for 30 years. Pastor Crane was initially dismissive. When Margaret persisted, asking about the town's history and whether there had been similar incidents before, his demeanour changed. He became angry, defensive. "Miss Wycliffe," he told her, "there are things in this town's past that are best left buried. I strongly advise you to focus on your teaching and avoid unnecessary speculation." But Margaret noticed something. When he said her name, Wycliffe, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Something about her surname disturbed him. She decided to investigate. Black Harbour's public library was a small room attached to the town hall, containing mostly agricultural manuals and a few donated novels. But Margaret discovered something interesting. A locked cabinet labelled Historical Documents, Town Administrator Access Only. Margaret was friendly with the town administrator's wife. She borrowed the key under the pretense of researching local history for her students. What she found in that cabinet would change everything. Among boring meeting minutes and property records, Margaret discovered a thin leather journal, water-damaged and fragile. The first page was dated April 1698. It was a partial record of a trial. 7 women accused of witchcraft, executed by burning. The leader of these women was named Constance Blackwood, but it was another name in the document that made Margaret's blood run cold. The settlement where this occurred was originally called Wycliffe Point, named after Captain Edward Wycliffe, the same surname as her own. Margaret's family had always said their ancestors came from Maine, though the details had been lost to time. Now, sitting in that dusty library, she realized she might be descended from the very man who had founded this town and presided over its darkest chapter. She spent the next 3 days reading everything she could find. The historical record was fragmented, deliberately so, but patterns emerged. The accusations against the women centered on blue flames and ocean rituals. The women had been burned at the spot where the town dock now stood, and in the weeks following the execution, several townspeople had died under mysterious circumstances, always near water, always with peaceful expressions. Margaret took detailed notes. She showed them to no one. But she began watching the ocean each evening, watching for the lights. On October 16th, she saw them again. This time, they were closer, bright enough to illuminate the water beneath them. And in that illumination, Margaret saw something that made her knees weak, shadows beneath the surface, shapes that seemed human, but moved in ways that human bodies should not move. She ran back to her boarding house and locked the door. The next night, Thomas Grayson walked into the ocean and died. The night after that, Margaret received a visitor, old Martha Brennan, the widow who would be found dead 3 days later. Martha came to Margaret's room after midnight, moving with surprising speed for her age. She was carrying a wooden box. "You're asking questions," Martha said, "questions that will get you killed. But I'm dying anyway, and someone needs to know the truth." She set the box on Margaret's desk. "My grandmother was there in 1698. She was 12 years old. She saw what happened, and she wrote it all down." Inside the box was a diary written in faded ink, pages yellowed and brittle, and on the first page, in careful handwriting, were the words, "The true account of the burning of the keepers and the pact that could not be broken." Martha left without another word. Margaret stayed up all night reading. By dawn she understood, and she was terrified. What happens when a pact made in desperation and sealed in blood is never truly broken? What happens when justice is replaced by murder? When 7 women burned alive swear their last breaths not to God, but to something far older? Margaret was about to discover that some flames never die. They simply wait beneath the surface, patient and eternal for the right moment to call their chosen ones home. Tell us in the comments what you think is happening so far. Are the lights supernatural, or is there a rational explanation? Share your theories with our community. The diary Margaret held in her trembling hands had been hidden for 177 years, passed down through generations of the Brennan family with strict instructions. Never show it to outsiders, never speak of its contents, and burn it if authorities came asking questions. Martha Brennan, knowing she was dying and seeing history repeat itself, had chosen to break that oath. Sarah Brennan had been 12 years old in 1698. the daughter of a fisherman who had settled in Wycliffe Point in 1695. Her diary began innocuously enough. A child's observations about daily life, complaints about chores, excitement about a new friend. But on April 1st, 1698, her tone shifted to terror. "Father said I must not write about this, but I cannot hold it inside. The soldiers came today with chains. They took Miss Constance and 6 others. They call them witches. They say terrible things about ceremonies in the woods, but Miss Constance was kind to me. She taught me to read. She helped Mother when the fever came. These accusations cannot be true." April the 2nd. "They built the pyre today. Father made me stay inside, but I watched from the window. The pyre is on the harbour shore, where Miss Constance and her friends used to collect shells. Captain Wycliffe himself brought the torches. He looked sick. People are afraid to speak against this." April 3rd, 1698. "I watched them burn. God forgive me, I could not look away. They did not scream, they sang. I did not recognize the words, but the melody made my chest ache. The flames turned blue. Father said it was the wind. But I know what I saw. The fire was not normal fire. And when the smoke cleared and the ashes fell into the water, the ocean itself seemed to glow." Miss Constance looked at me before the end. Her lips moved. I think she said, "Remember." The 7 of them held hands until the flames consumed them completely. April 4th. "Strange things are happening. 3 men who helped build the pyre have taken ill. They speak of hearing voices from the water. Father has forbidden me to go near the harbour." April 10th. "Captain Wycliffe is dead. They found him in the shallows, drowned, though he was the best swimmer in town. Father says we must never speak of these events again. He says the past must stay buried. But I hear singing at night, coming from the water. Blue lights dance on the waves. Others see them too, though no one will admit it." The diary continued sporadically for another year, documenting the slow exodus of settlers from Wycliffe Point, the renaming of the town, the deliberate destruction of records. Sarah's final entry, written in 1699, was chilling. "I'm 14 now. We are leaving for Boston. This place is cursed. Not because of what Miss Constance and her friends did, but because of what we did to them. The lights still come. People still disappear. And I know the truth that no one will say aloud. They did not go quietly into death. They made a pact, right there on that pyre, with something that lives in the deep waters. I heard the words they spoke, even though I did not understand the language. I felt the power of it, like thunder in my bones. This is not over. It will never be over. The flames still burn beneath the water, waiting." Margaret sat back, her heart pounding. This was not superstition or hysteria. This was an eyewitness account from a child who had no reason to lie, who had simply recorded what she saw. But there was more in Martha's box. Beneath Sarah's diary, Margaret found a thick envelope marked, "Pastor Crane, do not open." Her hands shook as she broke the seal. Inside were photocopies of church records, records that Pastor Crane had clearly been keeping secret. The documents detailed a pattern that made Margaret's skin crawl. 1702, 2 drownings, bodies found in shallow water, peaceful expressions, blue marks on skin. 1715, 4 disappearances during a week of unusual lights offshore. 1731, 6 deaths. All victims walked into the ocean voluntarily. Witnesses reported they seemed cold. 1748, a visiting minister attempts to perform an exorcism at the harbour. He drowns the next day. 1763, 8 deaths. The governor sends investigators. They find nothing conclusive and leave. One investigator never makes it home, drowns in a river 60 miles inland. 1788. The pattern repeats. 1802, the pattern repeats. 1823, the pattern repeats. 1847, the pattern repeats. And now, 1875, every 28 to 30 years, like clockwork, the lights returned. People died, then silence, until the next cycle. Pastor Crane had documented all of it. He had known, and he had done nothing but maintain the conspiracy of silence. Margaret felt rage building in her chest. How many had died because people like Crane chose secrecy over truth? But there was something else in the envelope. A note in Crane's handwriting dated October 1875, just days earlier. I am a coward. I have kept these secrets to protect the town's reputation, but people are dying. Miss Wycliffe is asking questions. She deserves to know the truth. I am leaving this record in Martha Brennan's care, as she is the only other person who knows the full history. If you are reading this, Margaret Wycliffe, then Martha has judged you trustworthy. I beg your forgiveness for my silence. The truth is this. In 1698, 7 women were burned for witchcraft. They were innocent of the charges. They were killed for being different, for threatening male authority, for practicing healing arts that frightened ignorant men. But in their final moments, they did something. I have read accounts from witnesses. They called out to something in the ocean, something old, something that predates Christianity or any religion we know. They offered themselves as sacrifices in exchange for revenge. And it accepted. Every generation, the pact renews itself. The lights are their signal. Those who see the lights and feel their call are marked. The ocean claims them, and there is nothing that can stop it once it begins. I have tried. Others have tried. The pact cannot be broken because it was never made with anything human. God help us all. Margaret felt the room spinning. This was impossible, and yet the evidence was undeniable. She needed to know more. October 21st, 1875. Despite warnings, despite fear, Margaret Wycliffe did what any good investigator would do. She went to the source. If the women had conducted ceremonies in the woods north of town, perhaps evidence remained. Perhaps she could find some explanation, some rational answer that didn't involve supernatural pacts and eternal revenge. She told no one where she was going. In retrospect, this was a mistake. Margaret's diary entry from that night, written hours later with badly shaking hands, provides our most detailed account of what she found. I reached the clearing at approximately 3 p.m. It took nearly an hour of walking through dense forest. I knew I had found the right place when I saw the stones. They were arranged in a circle, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, each stone roughly 3 feet tall. The center of the circle was perfectly clear of vegetation. No grass, no moss, nothing. The earth itself looked scorched, though the burning happened nearly 2 centuries ago. I approached cautiously. The air felt different here, colder. And there was a sound, very faint like distant singing. I convinced myself it was wind through the trees, but I knew it was not wind. I stepped into the circle. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. I should have left then, but I saw something carved into the central stone. Symbols, the same symbols that were found on the bodies of the drowning victims. I knelt to examine them more closely. That's when I saw the bones. They were half buried in the earth at the base of each stone. Human bones, small ones, finger bones, I think, 7 sets, 1 at each stone. The women had left offerings of themselves, pieces of their own bodies, buried before their execution, insurance that their pact would be permanent. I touched one of the bones. I will never forget what happened next. A rush of images, not thoughts but pure experience, flooded through me. I saw 7 women standing in this circle. I saw their faces. I saw them, cutting their own fingers, letting blood fall onto the stones. I saw them speaking words in a language that hurt to hear. I saw them opening something, a doorway, a threshold, between our world and something else. And I saw what came through. It was not demonic. It was not evil in any sense we understand. It was old, impossibly old, patient, hungry. and it agreed to their terms. It would take one volunteer from the town every generation, calling them with lights, claiming them peacefully, and in exchange, it would ensure that the truth of what happened in 1698 would never be forgotten, that the women's memory would persist as terror, as legend, as proof that some injustices cannot be buried. I pulled my hand away from the bone, gasping. The singing resumed. I ran. Margaret made it back to town as darkness fell. She went directly to Pastor Crane's house and pounded on his door. When he answered, she shoved Sarah's diary and his own notes into his hands. "You knew," she said. "You've always known, and you let people die." Crane's face was grey. "What would you have had me do? Tell the truth? That we live in a town cursed by justified revenge? That 7 murdered women made a pact with something beyond human understanding? Who would believe it, and what could possibly be done?" "We could leave," Margaret said. "We could abandon this place." "They tried that," Crane replied quietly. "In 1803, half the town moved. The lights followed them. Deaths occurred in their new location. The pact is not bound to the land, it's bound to the bloodlines. The descendants of those who participated in the burning. It will find them wherever they go." Margaret felt a chill. "Then we're all marked?" "Not all," Crane said. "Only those with direct descent from the 1698 settlers, and only those who see the lights and feel their call." He paused. "How many times have you seen the lights, Miss Wycliffe?" She didn't answer. She had seen them 5 times now. And each time she had felt something, a pull, a curiosity, a strange sense that the lights were beautiful, that moving toward them would bring peace. She was marked. 2 days later, 4 more people disappeared in a single night. All of them walked into the ocean during a spectacular display of the blue lights. Witnesses reported seeing the lights grow brighter than ever before, forming patterns that seemed to spell out words in some unknown script. By dawn, Black Harbor was in a state of near panic. Families began boarding up windows. People spoke of leaving. Pastor Crane called an emergency town meeting. It was at this meeting that Margaret Wycliffe did something radical. She stood up and told everyone the truth. Everything. The 1698 execution, the pact, the cycle of deaths, the evidence she had found. The response was mixed. Some called her hysterical. Others, the older families, fell silent because they had heard whispers of this all their lives, and now those whispers were being spoken aloud. "So what do we do?" someone shouted. "How do we stop it?" Margaret had been thinking about this. "We acknowledge it," she said. "We build a memorial to the 7 women. We speak their names. We admit what our ancestors did. Perhaps if we honor them, if we show genuine contrition, the pact will end." It was a desperate idea, but they had no other options. The next day, volunteers began constructing a memorial on the shore, at the exact spot where the pyre had stood. They carved the names of the 7 women into stone: Constance Blackwood, Mary Ashford, Sarah Hale, Rebecca Morton, Elizabeth Crawford, Ann Putnam, and Judith Mercer. The lights appeared that night, brighter than ever. And someone else walked into the ocean. The memorial had changed nothing. Because, as Margaret would come to understand, some pacts are not about forgiveness. They're about remembrance. The lights were not asking for mercy. They were fulfilling their purpose, ensuring that the town of Black Harbor would never, ever forget what happened in 1698, and anyone who tried to forget, anyone who tried to bury the past, would be claimed by the waters, joining the eternal testimony of the lights. The immediate horror of October 1875 ended as mysteriously as it had begun. By early November, the lights faded. The disappearances stopped. Black Harbor's residents, traumatized and diminished, tried to return to normal life. Margaret Wycliffe stayed another 6 months, documenting everything. Then, in March 1876, she quietly, resigned her teaching position and returned to Boston. She never married. She never taught again. Her diary, donated to the Maine Historical Society after her death in 1923, ends with a single haunting entry. I saw the lights 43 times. I felt their call. I understand now why people walk into the water. It is not compulsion. It is relief. The lights promise an end to grief, to guilt, to the burden of knowing terrible truths. But I will not go. I will remember. That is my curse and my purpose, to remember what we are capable of when fear makes us cruel. But the story of Black Harbor did not end in 1875. In the summer of 1903, a traveling photographer named Edmund Price visited Black Harbor to document the Maine coastline. He spent 3 weeks taking pictures of the harbor, the forest, the old church. On his final night, he set up his camera on the beach to capture a long exposure photograph of the stars over the ocean. What he captured instead would become one of the most debated images in paranormal history. The photograph, now housed in the Library of Congress, shows the Black Harbor shore at night. The exposure time was approximately 2 hours. In the foreground, the memorial to the 7 women is visible, and in the water, clear as day, are dozens of luminous blue orbs, arranged in perfect geometric patterns. But that's not the strangest part. When the photograph is examined closely, and modern digital enhancement has made this even clearer, shapes are visible within the lights. Human-shaped shadows standing in the water, arms raised, as if in prayer or summons. Edmund Price never returned to Black Harbor. He sold the photograph to a Boston collector and refused to discuss it. His personal journal, discovered after his death in 1941, contains a single entry from his Black Harbor trip. I saw things that night that no rational man should see. I heard singing from the water. I felt a pull toward the waves that took all my willpower to resist. I developed the photograph in my hotel room in Portland. When I saw what I had captured, I nearly destroyed it, but the world deserves to know. Something is in that water. Something that does not belong to our realm of existence. Dr. Patrick Sullivan, a history professor from Bowdoin College, became obsessed with the Black Harbor case in 1927 after reading Margaret Wycliffe's donated papers. He spent 2 years researching, interviewing elderly residents, scouring archives. In November 1929, he published a book, The Black Harbor Witchlights, a historical and anthropological analysis. The book attempted to provide a rational explanation for the phenomena, mass hysteria, natural bioluminescence, cultural trauma, manifesting as folklore. Sullivan's book was thorough, well-researched, and completely wrong. He discovered this on December 3, 1929, when he traveled to Black Harbor for a final research trip. Witnesses reported seeing him standing on the beach at sunset, notebook in hand, observing the lights that had begun appearing again, right on schedule, 28 years after the 1901 cycle. Sullivan was found the next morning in shallow water, drowned, peaceful expression, notebook still clutched in his hand. The last page contained a single sentence, written in shaking handwriting. I understand now. This is not folklore. This is real. God help me. I hear them singing. His book was pulled from publication. Most copies were destroyed. A handful survived, now collector's items in the world of paranormal research. In August 1957, the U.S. Navy conducted a classified investigation into unusual magnetic anomalies reported along the Maine coast. A destroyer was dispatched to Black Harbor to conduct measurements. For 3 nights, naval officers used sophisticated equipment to monitor the waters. On the 3rd night, August 12th, the equipment detected massive electromagnetic fluctuations in the harbor. At the same moment, the blue lights appeared. One sailor, petty officer, James Hendricks, jumped overboard without warning. He was recovered within minutes, unconscious but alive, the first person in recorded history to survive the call of the lights. Hendricks was hospitalized for observation. When he regained consciousness, he described his experience. "I heard singing, beautiful singing. It was in my head and all around me at once. I saw shapes in the water, women, I think, but also something else, something vast. I wanted to go to them more than I've ever wanted. Anything in my life. I remember hitting the water. I remember sinking, and I remember hands, dozens of hands, pulling me down. Then nothing until I woke up in the hospital." The Navy classified its findings. The official report stated, "No unusual phenomena detected. Sailor experienced apparent psychotic episode. No further investigation warranted." But the unofficial report, declassified in 1997, told a different story. It recommended that Black Harbor be designated a zone of anomalous activity, and that civilians be discouraged from settling there. This recommendation was never implemented. In 1984, paranormal researcher Dr. Jennifer Hartley conducted extensive interviews with Black Harbor's oldest residents as part of a doctoral thesis on regional folklore and collective trauma. One interview stands out. 92-year-old Robert Crane, grandson of Pastor Isaiah Crane, agreed to speak with her on the condition that she never reveal his identity. She kept that promise until his death. In 1989, the interview, now available in the archives of Boston University, is chilling. "My grandfather told me the truth before he died. He said the women who burned in 1698 were not evil. They were healers, midwives, independent women who threatened the power structure. The men of that time were afraid of them, so they invented accusations. They murdered those women to maintain control. And my grandfather said, God, I'll never forget his face when he told me this. He said that the women knew what was being done to them was unjust, so they made a choice. They chose not to die quietly. They chose to make a pact with something old, something that lived in the deep waters off our coast, something that predated humanity and would persist long after we're gone. They sacrificed themselves to that entity in exchange for one thing: eternal remembrance. The lights are proof that they cannot be forgotten. Every generation the lights return. People die, and everyone in Black Harbor remembers. What happened in 1698? My grandfather said that's the point. It's not revenge, it's testimony. The dead women are testifying forever that injustice has consequences that echo through centuries. Dr. Hartley asked Robert if he believed his grandfather's story. I've seen the lights, he replied, and I've felt their call. I believe every word. The fragmentary evidence continues through the decades. A 1991 incident, a 2003 phenomenon. Each time the pattern repeats. Each time people try to find rational explanations. Each time they fail. Because some truths cannot be explained rationally, some pacts once made cannot be unmade, and some flames once lit burn forever beneath the surface of dark waters. Black Harbor still exists today. The population hovers around 200. It never recovered from the exodus of families who fled after the 1875 incidents. The memorial to the 7 women stands on the shore, weathered by decades of salt spray and storms. Local authorities maintain it reluctantly, more out of tourist curiosity than genuine respect. The old church where Pastor Crane preached is now a community center. The schoolhouse where Margaret Wycliffe taught was demolished in 1962. The forest clearing where Constance Blackwood and her companions conducted their ceremonies is unmarked, known only to a few long-time residents who will not reveal its location to outsiders. And the lights, they still appear. The most recent major occurrence was in 2019, exactly on schedule, 28 years after the 1991 cycle. Local news reports described unusual bioluminescent phenomena off the Black Harbor coast. The Coast Guard investigated. They found nothing conclusive. But 2 people disappeared that October. Both were later found drowned in shallow water. Both had peaceful expressions. Both had faint blue marks on their skin that medical examiners could not explain and ultimately attributed to post-mortem lividity, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The case of the Witchlights of Black Harbor presents us with a profound question. What happens when historical trauma refuses to fade, when the injustices of the past demand eternal recognition? 3 primary theories have emerged over the years. Theory 1. Supernatural pact. The women executed in 1698 did indeed make a pact with a non-human entity. That pact remains active. The lights are its manifestation, and those who disappear are voluntary sacrifices to maintain the agreement. This theory is dismissed by academics but widely believed by locals. Theory 2. Collective psychosis. Black Harbor suffers from generational trauma that manifests as shared delusion. The lights are natural phenomena, bioluminescence, atmospheric conditions that residents have imbued with supernatural meaning. The deaths are tragic accidents amplified by cultural expectation. This is the official academic position, but it fails to explain many documented details. Theory 3. Something else. Perhaps the truth is neither fully supernatural nor fully psychological. Perhaps what happened in 1698 was an act of such profound injustice that it literally tore a hole in the fabric of reality, a wound that has never healed and continues to bleed into our world through these lights, these disappearances, these testimonies from the dead. We may never know which theory, if any, is correct. What we do know is this: 7 women were burned alive in 1698 for crimes they did not commit. Their names were Constance Blackwood, Mary Ashford, Sarah Hale, Rebecca Morton, Elizabeth Crawford, Ann Putnam, and Judith Mercer. They died unjustly. They died painfully. And whether through supernatural means or through the power of cultural memory, they have ensured that their deaths will never be forgotten. Margaret Wycliffe wrote in her final diary entry, "To remember what we are capable of when fear makes us cruel." Perhaps that is the true purpose of the lights, not revenge, but remembrance, an eternal reminder that when we allow fear to override justice, when we permit cruelty in the name of social order, the consequences echo through generations. The lights of Black Harbor continue to call. They will continue as long as the ocean laps against that rocky shore. And perhaps, in some way, that is appropriate. Some stories should not be forgotten, no matter how much time passes. To this day, no one knows the full truth of what happened in 1698 or why the phenomena continue. But every autumn, when the sun sets early and the Atlantic waters turn cold and dark, the people of Black Harbor watch the horizon, and sometimes, when conditions are right, they see that blue glow returning, and they remember. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you believe the lights are supernatural? Or is there a rational explanation we haven't discovered? Have you ever experienced something similar? Phenomena that defy easy explanation? Share your theories in the comments below. Our community thrives on these discussions, and I read every comment. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. We explore the darkest corners of American history every week, uncovering stories that have been buried, suppressed, or forgotten. Join our haunted community. We'd love to have you with us on this journey into the shadows. Thank you for listening to this investigation. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, the past is never as buried as we'd like to think.